Hello, my name is Kendall Davis. I live in Otter Creek, Maine, which is located upon Mount Desert Island. The island was discovered or rediscovered by Samuel D. Champlain, who sailed into Otter Cove on September 5th, 1604. One can only imagine the beauty that Champlain saw, with the mountains of the island changing colors with the season. The name applied by Champlain was Isles de Mont Desert, translated meaning the desert of mountains. Much time has passed since Champlain's visit and the demise of its summer native inhabitants, the Red Clay people, Wabanaki tribe. Their name derived from the method of which they buried their dead, in red clay. The passage of time brought the French, the British, and the division of the island between heirs of both nationalities. My first ancestor arrived here from England. His name was Samuel P. Davis, in 1750 or so. Like many of his time, he worked the trades in order to assure his survival. These trades comprised of logging, farming, or fishing. Samuel was a fisherman primarily, and a fact supported by the location of his home inside his fish house on Otter Cove. The community built itself around the cove back then, and families held vast tracts of land. Their livelihood and sustenance came from the ocean. These fish houses were homes, workplaces, storefronts, and together the community. The lands, though some were suitable for agriculture, proved limited for crops. The sediment coarse gravel left behind by the Wisconsin glaciers provided little rich topsoil. The land was more suited for harvesting timber, firewood, and hunting. These times must have been incredibly tough. Samuel married Comfort Bunker, another from the second wave of settlers to the island. The newlyweds resided, as many others of their time, in their fish house. It was not long before they had a son, also named Samuel P. Davis, Jr. He married Elvira Bracy, daughter of David Bracy, both residents of Otter Cove. As with many communities, a church and then a school were built. All, as my research uncovered, were projects carried out by the church group of the time, the Aid Society. The community grew and the Davis family grew, by each generation by only one child per, as it turns out, male in gender. Strangely, as Samuel Jr., they had no siblings, and in these first two transplanted generations remained fishermen. Born to Samuel and Elvira in the early 1800s was Thomas, the third generation of Davises here in Otter Cove. Thomas took a slightly different course. Though he remained tied to fishing, he explored farming. Thomas married Amelia Richardson around 1820. They set up a small farm beneath the bluff of a mountain on the edge of Otter Valley. Otter Cove became more known officially as Otter Creek. The movements of this generation and his generation saw more residents building inland. Farming and stores appeared, as if a more traditional village atmosphere. Thomas and Amelia had a single offspring, a son, Andrew. Andrew Davis married Clarissa Walls. She, as with all past generations' wives, was from Otter Creek. The community functioned more so around the activities of the local community with social interactions and became greatly interrelated. Andrew and Clara, as with Thomas, continued farming and fishing in order to survive. They in turn had the fourth generation of Davises in Otter Creek, three sons, Florentine, Fountain, and Ansel Davis. My lineage is through Florentine, who lived during the late 1800s until the early 1900s, and was engaged in fishing, hunting, logging, and carpentry. His first wife was Lydia Kimball, and their marriage failed after they had 8 children. Strange for the times, she left, and he raised all 8 children alone, including my grandfather. An old family story, as it has been told, is that my great-grandfather, seeing that a local boy had no place to live, took him in and raised him as if his own, with his own children. Years later, this young fellow asked Florentine for the hand of his daughter Myrtle in marriage, after they had lived under the same roof for many years. Florentine was asked if he ever knew anything was going on, and he smiled and said he never had any idea. Myrtle married Chester Walls, and they were married until death, 50-plus years. In fact, all the children of Florentine married and remained married to that person until their deaths, including my grandfather Sherman Davis Sr. When my grandfather came of age, things changed, accessibility for one. The day of horse or foot travel to the small town of Bar Harbor became minutes with automobiles. More so, travel to communities throughout Maine became more frequent. One such trip, my grandfather Sherman Sr. met Margaret Ward. In fact, though Sherman fished, he also worked in carpentry and building. It was during one of the jobs he traveled to with the Civilian Conservation Corps that he met my grandmother, a farm girl. They married and had 4 children during the Depression. My dad, Florentine, which was one of the sons of Sherman and Margaret, followed after his father. He also worked in construction, only working in concrete and steel, though. My father, as well, on a trip away from Otter Creek, met my mother Joyce in a tiny village of Indian River, Maine. Upon getting married, they moved to Otter Creek, and my father built their house. During the years, they moved to various locations as the work provided itself, before moving back to Otter Creek. They both had 2 daughters from previous failed marriages. Between them, they had myself and 2 more daughters, altogether 7 children. I met my wife Sally 20 years ago, and of all places the drive-through at our then local McDonald's. Since then, it has been replaced. We married and now have 3 children. I work in property acquisitions and development. With my duties, I travel statewide and at times out of state. I have spent very little time on a fishing boat or fishing, and never for a living. I have done some building, enjoy it, but usually I am the guy directing others of what they should do. We reside in Otter Creek, nestled between the mountains. I and my children are the last of our lineage residing here. The community has less and less interaction these days. People come home, go to sleep, get up, and commute to work. Many of the old residences are now owned by those living elsewhere that only come here for the summer. We are an island that is becoming less of a community, more of a resort, with little desire to be known or reflected of our local ancestry.